Hi, folks. Hope you're doing well today. So, today I'm going to be talking about a controversial and possibly offensive topic as well. But my knowledge on the Ossetians and Caucasus affairs is expert level, so I believe that I'm qualified to speak about this topic. My expertise is in Iranic affairs, geopolitics, history, and the socioeconomic and ethno-nationalist aspects of this topic. Should the Ossetians leave Georgia and Russia, even Russia, and become part of a Pan-Iranian state? Is the desire there? And is there a chance of this ever happening in any capacity? If you know a single thing about who the Ossetians are, and if you know a single thing about the Caucasus, the answer is no, without hesitation. The first reason why this can never happen is because linguistically and religiously and even culturally, the Ossetians are very, very different from other Iranics, even from East Iranics like the Pashtuns, who speak the Iranian language closest to Avestani. Though they have genetic and cultural similarities with other Iranics and cluster the closest with Iranics and other Caucasian people in their DNA, they do have BMAC ancestry like other Iranics, but the Ossetians also have native Caucasus hunter-gatherer DNA. Linguistically, the endangered Ossetian language is the closest living descendant of the language of the Scythians, and for most of them, the other language they know is either Georgian and or Russian. A common language is required to create a nation, and most of the Iranian languages aren't mutually intelligible with each other. A Kurd from Iraq or Turkey can't understand a Persian and vice versa. A Pashtun from Afghanistan and Pakistan may understand a Kurd or a Lori better than a Persian would, but not by a huge margin. Other Eastern Iranics cannot understand a Baluch. The Iranian language that the Ossetians speak is not intelligible to either Western or Eastern Iranics in any capacity. This all has to do with the Eastern and Western Iranian languages developing separately from each other. After all, Iranians migrated out of their holy homeland, original homeland in Bactria, in the BMAC region, particularly in the modern city of Balkh, and spread in many directions and split apart from each other. Now, religiously, most Iranians are Muslims. Some are still Zoroastrians or have converted to Zoroastrianism. We also have atheists, small compact communities of Jews and Christians, and other minor faiths. But the Ossetians are either predominantly Christian Orthodox or not religious and not open to Islam or Zoroastrianism. Their community also has a sizable but insignificant Muslim and neo-pagan population. Lots of other religious Iranics and the Ossetians themselves would take huge issues with this. Because of this, there is a clear religious and cultural barrier. There are clear religious and cultural barriers that make it very hard for the Ossetians to coexist with their pan-ethnic kin in a Pan-Iranist state. An Ossetian in Iran would be no different than a Georgian or a Russian in Iran. The Ossetians are more like, and I mean a Georgian from Georgia, not like the Faridun Georgians or the Iranians of Georgian ancestry, mind you. The Ossetians are more like the Kurds, Loris, Bakhtiaris, and Pashtuns in the sense that, and then they are then ethnic Persians in the sense that they have been historically been a non-sedentary people, and they were tribal pastoralists and steppe farmers. But now the Ossetians in Georgia are mostly indistinguishable from the ethnic Georgian population. There's no difference between them on average. If you want to insist on the linguistic ties that the Ossetians have with other people, you can only make this case with the Ossetians living in the Russian Federation. Otherwise, a huge portion of Georgia's Ossetian community can't even speak a word or single sentence of Ossetian. They can barely speak Ossetian. The Caucasus used to be a cosmopolitan and polyglot region, but in recent decades, every region has been homogenized a lot. However, a lot of Ossetian families who don't know their own language have usually assimilated voluntarily, but there are some ethnic Ossetian villages in Georgia where the language is still spoken, but not that many. Likewise, if there are Georgians living in those villages or small towns, they would be somewhat Ossetianized and be familiar with the Ossetian language as well. You still see the Ossetian cultural and ethnic identity preserved in some places like Georgia. In some places in Georgia, like the Lagodechi district and the Ossetian villages in the Kazbeki and Borjomi districts. But for the most part, Georgia's Ossetians can only speak in Georgian, and the country is ethnically and culturally homogeneous. In the Caucasus, Azerbaijani means Azerbaijani Turk, Armenian means Orthodox Armenian, Georgia is for the Georgians, and Georgian means ethnic Georgian Orthodox. Another problem is that there isn't even any geographic continuity that can make this scenario even possible. If there was geographic continuity, however, that might be a different story. But there isn't, not unless the territories are either annexed or the populations there are wiped out down to the last man, which isn't going to happen. Valuing a territory more than the people who live in that territory is wrong. It makes genocide and ethnic cleansing and conflict inevitable. Though the Ossetians are Indo-Iranians, the Alans, the ancestors of the Ossetians, always lived on the fringes of the Persian state to start with, and they also frequently moved locations all across the Eurasian steppes, multiple times throughout their history. They may not be the natives of the Caucasus, but they're not the natives of the Iranian plateau either. Basically, the Ossetians, i.e. the Alans, since they weren't a sedentary people, they always lived on the fringes of the Iranian heartland and the geographical boundaries of Iran that was created by the Sassanids, and thus they couldn't be subsumed by Iran's sedentary civilization. But the different history and even the fact that the ancestors of the Ossetians, the Alans, fought Persia is not the reason why this can't happen. Saying that the Alans, the ancestors of the Ossetians, and the Yas people of Hungary fought the Parthians as enemies and as Roman proxies, and that the Ossetians have nothing to do with us for that, is a very shallow and inconsequential argument. Because by that argument, the Greek Corinthians and Spartans should have nothing to do with each other as Peloponnesians, just because they went to war with each other, and different Greek city-states were used by the Persians as allies to fight other Greeks, and proxies to fight other Greeks. When Iran lost its Caucasian and Central Asian territories after its catastrophic wars with Russia in the 19th century, the new borders were finalized and naturalized to the point where everyone in the region is used to them. There are nationalists in each country in this region, in Iran, in Azerbaijan, in Afghanistan, etc., who do contest their borders and say that we need to take back lost land that our ethnic communities live in, and we need to take back imagined greater territory. This does make up some of the national identities of some Iranic people, but these are just nationalistic feelings. These feelings can't come to fruition because the national sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of all of these states are almost universally recognized by the international community. The treaties which gave away these territories to other states have all expired. Either one or both of the states that signed these treaties, like the Tsarist Russian Empire, no longer exist. Technically, the independent states can start a referendum asking the question of whether the population of the territories want to reunite with Iran or not, but they haven't done that. Neither the Ossetians or the Republic Azeris or Armenians, Georgians, Tajiks, Turkmens, and Uzbeks express any interest in reuniting with Iran in one state. Georgia and the northern Caucasus are both very fertile, just as fertile as Iran. In fact, the very first people to cultivate crops and agriculture came from the Iranian and Caucasus regions. But Iran cannot deal with migrants and refugees any more than Georgia and Russia can. It cannot integrate millions of Ossetians to an already 80 plus million population, where the economy is volatile, there's unemployment problems, a recession, the entire country is sanctioned, and there's a general inability to deal with refugees and migrants from neighboring Afghanistan, from ethnic Hazaras, Tajiks, and Pashtuns, who speak the same language and have the same culture as the Iranian population, let alone from a people like the Ossetians. They would be exactly what the Afghans are in Iran, an unwelcome labor force that takes jobs away from the locals. The behavior of the Ossetians in comparison to the Afghans would be A grade. In fact, they would be the most civilized people in the country. But their threat to the job market and labor market, coupled with the state's lack of money and state resources to accommodate them, and their Christian religion in a Sharia country, would put the Ossetians in a very problematic situation in Iran. Iran has the exact same issues as Russia does in a developmental sense. It has had little to no experience with modernization, even though it's a first world country compared to Georgia, with its GDP about $1 trillion, natural resources that are good enough to send its economy into oblivion if it weren't for corrupt elements of the economy. Another issue is assimilation and the social impact that it would take to make 950,000 Ossetians to move to a country that they were never a part of. There are only 950,000 Ossetians in the world. They're a very, very, very small population. And we want to relocate this already endangered population, abandoning their already and make them abandon their already endangered language in place of the national lingua franca of Iran, Persian. And they would also have to inevitably leave behind their Orthodox Christian religion to convert to religions that their people were never a part of, ever in their history. So getting the Ossetians to assimilate and integrate themselves more with the rest of the Iranic world would be a very, very difficult and stressful, if not impossible, task. And to give all of this up to distance themselves from the Georgians, Russians, and their neighboring Caucasian communities, the Vaynaks, Ingush people, Chechens, Dagestanis, etc., to merge with the Iranian world that they only have had a very tenuous connection to start with, that has no logic in it whatsoever. So when you think about shit like this, it really doesn't make any sense. These people, the Ossetians, have their own national identity, culture, and way of life. They're literally their own ethnicity. Just because they share the historical geographic restrictions, and either the state we're a part of, ditch the state, either ditch the state we're a part of, or merge our state with the mother country. It doesn't matter where Ossetians are in the world. Wherever they are, they're still Ossetians and they're still Iranic. Are we going to tell the Iranian people living in the West to pack their bags and come back home too, and literally let go of all of the foundations they have in Canada, the US, Germany, Sweden, and the like? Just because your roots are Iranic doesn't mean that you belong in an Iranic state. Another problem is that the Ossetians have a very different political outlook compared to other Iranics. If the Ossetians are socialists, then that's going to be a huge problem, because other Iranics, like the Afghans, vehemently hate socialists on average, and fought them for more than 15 years because they couldn't accept a new rulership from them. There would be a potential for civil war. Last point is that there are actually separatist sentiments within the Ossetian community of Georgia. ethnic relations between the Georgians and the Ossetians are generally very cordial and very fine. The Ossetians aren't considered outsiders, and they don't experience any discrimination. Then again, Georgians are not racist people on average. There's a fact on the ground. This is a fact on the ground that gives us Pan-Iranians a considerable advantage. However, most Georgian Ossetians want to leave Georgia and join their ethnic kin in North Ossetia, Alania. This is a process that has already been occurring since 1991. More and more Ossetians have been leaving Georgia every year to move to Russia, to their own republic in the Russian Federation. The Ossetian population in Georgia has been declining enormously each decade. Now there are barely even 26,000 Georgians left in Georgia, according to the 2009 estimate. It's definitely even lower now. The out-migrations mostly come from the rural regions and the villages where life is the shittiest in Georgia by far. And most of the ones still in Georgia identify as Georgian nationals, first and foremost. And they've also integrated enormously and have zero trouble speaking in Georgian and can barely speak Ossetian. They're not outsiders there. The people are of the same race as the Georgians basically now. Most of them, but they're also the people of the same race as the North Ossetians, the Ossetians living in the Russian Federation. And most of the Georgian Ossetians have extensive family in North Ossetia, Alania, even though they may have never actually been there before or met them in person. This doesn't have anything to do with them. This meaning the separatist sentiments doesn't have anything to do with them not fitting in or being oppressed and stigmatized, but because life in Georgia is complete and utter shit. Public and social services are horrible. The income of the average worker in Georgia is horribly low and barely enough to survive. The Georgian economy is dependent on remittances. The GDP of the country is less than 50 billion USD. There are no sustained social institutions. The government sucks. It's weak. The frozen conflict over South Ossetia puts them in a really complicated and pessimistic position where they can't receive any benefits from family members living in Semichavlo or North Ossetia because the Georgian-Russian border is closed and Georgia cut off diplomatic ties. Even though the North Ossetians are very isolated and have a lot of difficulties in even traveling anywhere outside their own republic, they're still very happy. When it comes to the South Ossetia issue, the Ossetians of Georgia are on Georgia's side. They view the conflict exactly the same way the Georgians do, which is Russia trying to destroy and balkanize an independent state that wants to go its own way. The 2008 war did not foster any ethnic tensions between Ossetians and Georgians, or hard feelings whatsoever. But if the window of opportunity opens up in the future, they will want to reunite with their relatives in North Ossetia. And if that happens, if they really want to do it, then all Iranians should support them and back them. If North Ossetia decides to be Pan-Iranian foreign policy-wise, then we do have a dream come true. And this is where I end my dissertation. Thank you for watching.